Hey, Dustin Vanoy here. I'm going to share with you a bit about Azure Stream Analytics and show you how we get that set up, talk about some of the features and capabilities, and then we'll look at creating a Stream Analytics job or two. So, Stream Analytics is a really easy way to do streaming within Azure. It's very tightly integrated within Azure, but it also has limited inputs and outputs. So, what that means is that if you're working with Azure and you find a use case that fits well, it's an easy solution. It's serverless, auto scale, some really good features. But if you're working with a variety of sources like Apache Kafka, not Event Hubs or Event Hubs for Apache Kafka, but a true Apache Kafka or Confluent Cloud setup, it's not going to work for you unless you start also streaming that data into Event Hubs, which is all very possible and reasonable. But basically, the point is that if you're within Azure, if you're looking for an easy way to do stream analytics, or you're bringing data into Azure from another, Kafka cluster or something like that, it might be a good fit for you. So without further ado, let's take a quick look and see what we think of this. Let's first set up our stream analytics job, and that'll help us get a feel for what capabilities exist there. If we find stream analytics in the portal and create a brand new job, Demo Stream Analytics. Very creative name, I know. And then we will select a resource group. I have a streaming resource group that it'll fit well in. Hopefully that's the right location. We'll just keep going. And then streaming units, it defaults to 3. I'm okay with that for this scenario. You may want to secure private data assets. You may want to look into some of your options around data protection. There's a nice article in the docs that I think will give you a lot of good info. If you have an edge case where you're not hosting in the cloud, you're actually hosting elsewhere on edge devices, definitely look up into that. But most cases, at least for getting started, testing it out, we don't need to add all this data security quite yet. Definitely for production workloads within your company, take a look at that and make the right decisions for your use case. So as it's deploying, we actually have some interesting things we can see. One is that it deployed really quickly. So that's nice. Like I said, easy to get started, easy to use, especially if you're trying to do this from the UI. There are APIs so that you can do some things with Stream Analytics jobs from using some kind of client that you write that's calling REST APIs. But we'll just stick with the UI for this demo. That deployed pretty quickly, and now we can take a look at the next steps for our job. So if we want to set up event hubs for our Azure streaming, we can jump to the event hubs page, choose create, pick a valid resource group, and give it some sort of name. Okay, I have that created. And then you need to choose a location. Usually you're going to put it near your other resources. And then the pricing tier is interesting. If I'm doing a demo, there is this basic, very, very strict number of consumers and broker connections type of option. But I'm going to use Event Hubs for Apache Kafka in some of my examples. So let me go ahead and choose standard. You cannot do Event Hubs for Apache Kafka with basic. And then, of course, if you're setting this up for your company and production environment, you might want to take a look at this preview premium option and other options that are available. Throughput units, this is actually for the whole namespace. So if I create a lot of event hubs, then this could become, something I need to spin up more. For a demo, 1 is fine. Auto inflate is a good thing to know exists. I'll go ahead and say 1 to 2, which I probably will never even inflate with the example I'll do, but just to make sure we have a little bit of flexibility in how much throughput we can handle. You have the option to choose tags, and then you'll review the options you've selected and choose create. So once your Event Hub namespace is created, you can go and set some various settings. The access control is something you'll always need to think about within Azure. And we can add some access policies, which are typically used. In this case, I'll start by doing some stream analytics example, which will add one, and then I might just use this default root directory, which probably isn't what you'll do in production. You'll probably want to limit it to just produce or just consume, send or listen. But for now, we'll just stick with that for a demo. I can go change my throughput units after I've done it. I can go think about geo recovery. I have network settings, which is pretty typical to limit it to some internal Azure resources, some internal virtual networks. Encryption is something you certainly want to think about. I often am pretty comfortable not using a customer managed key, but if it's at a company, I let them make that decision, of course. And then we can always go down and view our properties. Now we get to the good stuff. Under entities, we have a schema registry, which is an option that it's not going to work exactly like a Confluent schema registry, but it's something you can work with within Event Hubs. Maybe I can come back and talk about that another time. For now, though, let's take a look at the Event Hubs page. So here we are on the Event Hub section, and this is where I can actually create an Event Hub. So when you go to create an Event Hub, basically what you're defining is here's my Event Hub name and then the partition count. And so partition count is going to let you decide how much you can scale your consumers. If I only have one partition, then all of my data is going to one single partition, and I can really only consume from that partition. Whereas if I have, let's say, 3 partitions, I could have 3 separate consumers, all with the same consumer group ID, and those will then each read only the messages that they should, right? So it's going to kind of split our messages into 3 groups, if you will, and they'll each grab a piece of that, and that way you're running in parallel with 3 different consumers. So we have the option of 1 to 7 days here, and for message retention, and you may only need it for a day or two just in case you need to catch up or replay some data. I could also choose to turn on capture, which is going to store that data in Azure storage. And so then I could store it for indefinitely instead of only for 7 days. You go ahead and give it a name, click create, and now you've got an event hub you can start to work with. And again, you can either take that root policy with all of the permissions it could have, or you could create one specific for an event hub if you're really trying to lock this down to only those that need to use it. So here I'm in a Stream Analytics job I created and it's blank. Let me go ahead and add the inputs and we'll talk about that as we go. So we only have the 3 options. I'll go ahead and add Event Hub here, and then we can give it a name. And this is really just for Stream Analytics. So I'll call it EH1 input, sure. And then we need to pick an Event Hub's namespace. I'll go and choose Demo EH2. We can use an existing Event Hub that I already set up. I just find it's easier to set up the Event Hubs in advance. And then, well, to go ahead and let it create a new user group. I don't normally have problems with that. And then I have trouble getting managed identity to work. You'd have to go set that yourself typically, at least in my environment, it fails quite a bit. So I just go ahead and use a connection string for demos at least. And then you can either create a new Event Hub policy for this, or you can use existing. I like to create new if I have the permissions. It gives it a default name that's very obvious to me where it's coming from, and that's all taken care of. You would want to think about partition key if you're using Event Hubs, especially if you have a lot of data coming through. We won't get into that right now. Let's focus on sort of just setting up this technology for a basic scenario. The serialization format, you have a few options to choose from. We will go ahead and stick with JSON for ours. This is really what the input data is going to be coming from Event Hubs. So you may not have the choice in the real world. Someone else may be producing the data for you, and you just need to find out that format that they're using to serialize that data. Encoding is always going to be UTF-8 at this point. Event compression type, you have a few options if you're going to deal with compressed data. We'll click save. That should be able to create that policy. I think I have all the right permissions here. And then we have an input that we can use in our Stream Analytics job. Let's go ahead and decide what our output will be. So we have an input and an output, and then we get to define the query and potentially functions and lookup data if we choose to. We'll go ahead and just write it back to Event Hubs. I think that if we're doing a data engineer practice that I think I want to show you is if we are doing some processing, maybe some aggregation, we would often want to keep that data streaming for multiple consumers. And so if everything's going to be done by us in Stream Analytics, then we could have multiple outputs here. But really, let's pretend that we've got additional consumers, maybe even some kind of reporting microservice that goes back to the customers. And we want to make sure they can get this exact same data. So for this piece of the Stream Analytics job, we're going to just write it back to Event Hubs. We'll call that EH out. I'll use Event Hub namespace and create a new Event Hub topic. Demo out. There we go. Okay, so we have Event Hub name, demo out. I'll go ahead and do a connection string. We'll let it create a brand new one for us. Partition key, I'm not really going to worry about this for the example. I'm not going to work with property columns. And I'll go ahead and have it write the data out as JSON. That way it's the most portable for the different consumers I expect to have. Typically with analytics and with streaming systems, we'll do line separated JSON. So you'll have multiple JSON objects in, if you're writing to files within a file, maybe within a batch that gets sent from Stream Analytics. And then the encoding is going to still be UTF-8. Within Stream Analytics, I'm mostly going to be working on adding a query that will transform the data. I do want to point out very quickly that there's this functions feature where you can have an Azure ML service or ML Studio or a JavaScript function. So the really important piece of the Stream Analytics job is the query itself. And this is where that Stream Analytics query language comes into play. Notice you can jump here and take a look at the docs right from Stream Analytics job, which is really handy because if you're new to this, you'll probably need to check those out for the exact functionality you're looking for. The select star means select all of the fields that will be in the message. And where do we want that to go? We're going to put it into our output event hub EH-out1. And from is going to be EH1 input. So if I were to run this, all I'd be doing is taking data from one event hub and writing it to another event hub. There's a chance we'd want to do that. Probably not with event hubs, though. I don't think that's very likely to be our case. Let's start looking at some of the other capabilities we have. First, before we can really do much here, I need to have data flowing, and then I have some handy features like input preview that we can use. So I'll go kick off my producer, and once we have some data, we can start to build out this query a little more. For the time being, I'll go ahead and save it. Let's take a look at Azure Stream Analytics hands-on, and I'll do this with a Stream Analytics job. So here we are in Azure Stream Analytics in the query pane, and I've already set up an output topic and an input topic. These are both Event Hub topics at first. And what's going to happen is if I kick this off is we will select every record from my input data and send it along to the output topic. If we take a look at our sample data towards the bottom, we can see that I've got the New York taxi trip data. We can see our column names and get a glimpse of the data types. And from there, I could actually, instead of doing select star, I could start to choose just a few of the fields to work with. So for example, if I do trip distance and passenger count and vendor ID and do a test query, it's going to show me a much, smaller number of columns. And it's going to show me the first 50 rows from the recent data that's streamed in. In addition, I could do filters. So a lot of the things that you'd expect to do with SQL, especially things that would work in T-SQL, are available here. The more you get into functions and the more advanced things, the less likely it is to match up. But that's why the query language docs are so helpful, and they're right here to open up and take a look at what you care about. So for example, if I wanted to only get vendor 2, I could easily add vendor ID equals 2 or 1, 2. So here I'm querying only for vendor ID equals 2 just by adding that where clause, and you can see that it's narrowed down those results, so that's pretty good. I can also do aggregation. So let's go and take a look at an aggregate. As you probably know from running SQL queries, we would need to use aggregate functions. So I can sum passenger count for a total number of passengers. I can sum trip distance. And then maybe we'll do a pretty simple calculation. So we could do average of the tip amount and total amount. Let's go ahead and continue on this group by. So if I hover over, I'll see that it's telling me that I need to have a group by statement or I need to use the over clause. So let's go and add a group by vendor ID. And then what it's looking for as well is a window. basically data is going to continue to stream. So we need a way to define what window of time, what section of time do we want to aggregate this data for. So let's go ahead and use a tumbling window. Give it a duration, and that will take care of the warnings we were getting. What it's going to do is there's a event time that comes in with this data from Event Hubs, and it's going to, by default, use that for my window. We really would probably go back and take, you may have seen there's a pickup time that we might use instead, and basically you would just define that on the from clause. We'll just let it use the default event timestamp and run this test query and see what we get. Now I'll go ahead and produce some more data and we'll see how this changes things. So if we go back and refresh our input preview, that'll change the data that we're looking at. Now when I run my test query, I have numbers that are different than before. Likewise, if I keep refreshing the input, then those numbers will change. What that means is I could go ahead and save this and run this, and we should see every minute we're getting results. Now this is okay, but vendor ID, there's only 2 vendors right now, and the ID itself doesn't give me a lot of information. What I'd rather do is use the taxi zone. So let's see how we can take some reference data as input and find the right value and use that for the grouping. So I have my query based on vendor ID with the group by and the select clause using it, but there's only 2 vendors. And so I really want to go and join that into the taxi zone data so I can see what zone the pickup happened in. In order to do that, we need to add a reference data set and then we'll add a join. To get my zone data and change from vendor to zone, I need to add a reference input. That reference input, the easiest option I've seen is the SQL database, so we'll go ahead and get that set up. And I have a serverless SQL instance going. I can go ahead and enter my connection information here. And then I need to update the SQL statement to be valid for my database. Okay, and now I can save. Now I have reference data and I can actually join that in. So to get Zone SQL joined in, I'll alias my first input. I'll go ahead and add in Zone SQL, set up the join clause, and now I need to take this T1 alias and use it in front of each of the fields that comes from that initial input. And then rather than use vendor ID, I'm actually going to replace it with T2 zone, which is the name of my taxi zone. Now I can test out this query and see if I got all of that syntax correct. And there we go. We've now have many more records each time this tumbling window runs. And we can see our data by zone, which I think would be a little more realistic than just the vendor ID. Then you can go ahead and save that query and kick off your job, and you'll see data in the output event hub. To kick off your job, you can go to the overview page and click on start. And it'll take just a little bit of time to spin up these resources for you. I've got the 3 streaming units. Check this before you run it because this is where it starts to cost you a little bit of money. Kick off my job, that'll take a little bit of time, and then I'll check and make sure that I'm getting output in my event hub. So now that it's run for a little bit, it's produced some events, it's hit a tumbling window of 1 minute, and it's output 23 events. Let's go take a look at our output topic and see those results. So from my output event hub, I can scroll down to the monitoring, and this will show me that some messages have been received. And then I can go and use process data, which is actually going to take me to this other way of getting a Stream Analytics job. So this is like a Stream Analytics query built into viewing the events coming out of Event Hub. So we get to that same view, same Stream Analytics query language will work. We'll keep it simple and just kind of run to see the test results. And like before, There we go. And so it might be a little lag, but it should come in pretty soon. Feel free to hit it once or twice. And then if I'm looking through here, I have this event in queue time, and I should see that the same zone might show up multiple times for different tumbling windows. And the event in queue time is what will help me catch that. Now, in our example, I was outputting to another Event Hub topic, which I think is fairly typical for data engineers to have some parts of their processing that are streaming, read from Event Hubs or a similar broker, and write back out to that broker to a different topic. And the reason for that is so that multiple consumers can read the data. However, you may have other use cases where you need to write directly to storage with Stream Analytics. And so there's quite a few outputs we can choose from. One of the ones I find really interesting is Power BI. I can actually set this up to do a live report within my Power BI service. So obviously you'll need Power BI set up, you'll need to authorize and all that, but that just so you know, that capability is out there. If you're trying to do real-time reports, this might be a way you pull that off. So that's our hands-on look at Azure Stream Analytics. I hope that you learned something along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel or check out dustinvanoy.com for more content. I'll see you next time.